Hello, and welcome to another episode of the William Branham Historical Research Podcast. I'm your host, John Collins, the author and founder of William Branham Historical Research at william-branham.org, and with me I have my very special guest, Jessica Wehrle. And today we're talking about all things IHOP and NAR and Charismatic and what it means to be spirit-filled while suddenly discovering that there's a whole mess out there, and what is this mess? And so Jessica and we got to talking via email, and Jessica, it would be good maybe if you just take a moment and tell everybody about yourself and how you got connected to this weird world that I've been researching.
I've been really enjoying your videos on YouTube. I've been watching them as I try to start detangling myself from all of the craziness that was mixed up inside of IHOP. My background is I started at a house of prayer in Chicago when I was just 17 years old. And that house of prayer was just starting. The year was 2001. So very shortly after Mike Bickle's house of prayer started. Today, I am, in my 40s and have 5 kids and living far away from all that. And I left the house of prayer world all the way back in 2008. Not the world. I left that particular house of prayer in about 2008. So my window of involvement was not super brief, but man, I was all in. I was staffed for at least 20 hours a week, almost that entire time. And even the hours that I didn't need to be there, it was just such a home for me that I loved it. I was there all the time.
And it's mentally taxing, right? To be so engaged all the time while you're there, you're thinking about the church. And then when you leave, you're thinking about the church. And it's constantly there, this sense of urgency. We've talked about this in a few different podcasts. They give you the sense of urgency and it just sticks with you. And what was it like whenever you made the transition away? A lot of people feel this strange emptiness whenever they get disconnected from the urgency. Did you experience this?
That word urgency, all I can think of is their catchphrase, the urgency of the hour. Have you heard that? I
haven't.
The urgency of the hour. That was an often repeated phrase. Corey Russell would talk about it, which I still like Corey Russell. All kinds of, we need to be here. We need to be crying out for the return of the Lord. The Spirit and the bride say, come, we need to build his house. Lots of conversations about Nehemiah building the wall. A lot of inserting ourselves into the scriptural narrative from history and applying it to right now. But yeah, so leaving the prayer movement and then just kind of being a normal person was weird. It was really strange to come out of that. And then the elitism stuck with me. I'm a forerunner. That was another big word. I'm a forerunner. I'm to carry this message wherever I go. I just felt like I was more different and special. Not that I thought I was a better person, but that I had this secret knowledge, this higher revelation, that if only you knew what I knew.
It's very odd to me tracking the history of this movement from splinter group to splinter group into the, IHOP, the NAR. They always use that catchphrase of the hour, and they can say whatever they want before of the hour, because if they say of the hour, it's urgent, right? You have to be mixed in with this. And the thing that all of these groups seem to have in common is they want to put onto your shoulders, you being the rank and file members of the cult, the sense of urgency that it's your job to make sure that you build yourself up to a level of hype that Jesus comes back. And so you're staying in this hype forever, and it's exhausting from what people are telling me. I was in a similar hype, but it was the hype for destruction, because the latter rain movement was seeking for a destruction of the United States. So we had a hype for destruction, and then that's no fun. So as it went into charismania, it was more of a let's work ourselves up because Jesus is going to come back if we can work ourselves up.
That absolutely did happen.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit more about the early experiences you had. So you were in one of the original houses of prayer. What was that like? You said you spent 20 hours ish in there. What were some of the things that you did when you were a part of that movement?
Yeah, so we were the first internship that opened the house of prayer. What had happened was my youth pastor went away to Kansas City, got a download. It's a commonly used term, not like he plugged himself into a computer, but a download from heaven, like this new, fresh commission that he got from Kansas City to build God's house, to build a house of prayer, and wherever, where he lived, which was Chicago. So he brought this fresh vision back to the church. Our original pastor stepped back and retired. And this guy became the full-on pastor and then started a house of prayer to the side of our church. And where I was at when it started was I was a 17-year-old girl that had been homeschooled her whole life in a Christian bubble her whole life. I was attending church in the womb. So I was always in it. And I had just attended my first semester of a secular college. And that was a very confusing experience for me because, I'm not in that yes bubble of all of this is correct. I got people making fun of me, people making fun of Christian beliefs constantly. And I was in a typical struggle in college where you're trying to figure out, who am I really? That was my parents' thing? Is it my thing? I don't know. So when our her pastor turned pastor said, this is the house of prayer. We're starting it. We're calling forth interns to staff this place. I thought, well, if I'm going to try it and maybe I will find out that it's not for me. That I gave it 20 hours a week and I'm just not a Christian. Or, oh my gosh, yes, this is definitely me. So that is my entrance into House of Prayer world. And it was, like I said, totally foreign concept of the Bridal Paradigm was all very new to me. In that last year, he had started talking about it at our church. But the Bridal Paradigm was pretty new. And should I explain that?
Yeah, that would be good.
There's all different ways that the Bible uses to explain God's love for us as humans. And it's so different that it requires a lot of different relationships to say, it's kind of like this, it's kind of like this, it's kind of like that. Like a father-child relationship, king, servant, he's the judge, he's also a bridegroom. It's mentioned a couple times in the scripture. He's a bridegroom and us as the body of Christ, we're the bride. Well, we got really into studying that scandalous book, Song of Songs, and using it as a Bible study tool to understand God's love for us that way. And it wasn't just like corporately as a body of Christ, we are the bride and he's the bridegroom. It was also, in our individualistic society as Americans, I'm the bride of Christ and he's my bridegroom. And there was lots of bridal imagery there. There was always a disclaimer at the beginning of a Song of Solomon class because the first verses are kiss me with the kisses of your mouth. They said, stop. We're not going to imagine kissing Jesus. Okay. That's weird. And I'm like, phew, because that's not cool with me. That's ew. So they really sold us on the metaphor. Like this is all metaphorical, obviously, because if anyone's ever read the Song of Solomon, it's very, very strange imagery. Like, am I supposed to be flattered that you said I have an ivory tower neck and I've got goats on me? Like, I'm not really sure. Like, it's really different. So they would go into like the law of first mentions, of like, well, the first time this is what it meant, so we're going to apply that here. And it was really interesting. The biggest takeaway for me that was good was that God doesn't just love me, he likes me, he enjoys me, that I am an enjoyed creation of God. And I still think that's great. It transformed my relationship with God to be that of a fearful of judgment all the time to I'm delighted in. And so that's good, right? It was just a lot. There's all different ways to experience God's love or to understand God's love. And that was definitely the hyper focus of that movement.
Yeah, you just basically described every church that I've been to since a small child in the Branham cults. They all often did this bride and bridegroom thing because under the framework of British Israelism, you were to believe that the United States and Canada was one of the lost tribes of Israel, and that all of the bride passages that you read from the Old Testament was applicable to us as the 20th, 21st century Christians, right? And I'll never forget, see, they didn't tell us this British Israel thing. I had no idea until I began researching that this was a thing. And I just remember I came across reading Ezekiel 16, and it was talking about God's faithless bride, Jerusalem. And I'm scratching my head, wait a minute, Jerusalem? And I started looking at every passage that I could find. Obviously in the Old Testament, it's all applicable to the children of Israel. And then you get into the New Testament and book of Hebrews, etc. There's a clear transition where it's talking about the bride being Jerusalem. And then now there's a new covenant and there's this clear separation, right? And when that first hit me, I was like, this can't be right. I ended up reading my Bible over and over and over, trying to just piece together and understand what all of this meant, because we were taught that there was this coming destruction, like I said, and we were part of the bride, the elite Christians. And then outside of this group of elite Christians were they had different names for them, but the worst of which was cannon fodder Christians, the ones that were to be sent to the enemies to be destroyed is basically what this meant. So we as the elite were the good guys, we're the bride that God loves, and they're the non-bride that are going to be destroyed.
How very convenient.
Yeah, it was a mess. So I recently, in fact, it was just yesterday, I had a podcast recording, which will come out later, maybe before this one, of a lady who also went into some similar challenges when she got into the education system, and she had to try to reconcile, now that she's in, I think you called it the real world, but she used the phrase, not in the same hype or the same level of excitement of the message that she was in. You start to realize that there are two separate worlds that exist, and you're trying to reconcile, how does this work? How is this possible? And you begin to critically think. And some of the things that you critically think about are, it really can't apply to the cult. And so there's this big separation between, now you're seeing that there's reality, and then there's this fictional part this fictional story that you were part of. What was that like whenever that began to hit you?
The critical thinking aspect is such a big piece. Realize primarily young people were being called to this movement. From Mike Bickle's in Kansas City to Houses of Prayer all over. It was this vision they had of all these young people coming in. And now we know Mike Bickle was doing that because he loved the ladies, the younger ladies, right? But we, us younger people, another reason is our critical thinking isn't at peak when you're 19 years old, 22 years old. We're still so malleable. You said, while you were already grown, I was kind of a grown up in the sense that I was physically matured, but I was still extremely malleable, extremely impressionable. And a lot of my identity was formed in this bubble, in this movement. There's good parts and there's bad parts. And as I've grown, I feel like when I hit 30, something clicked, and I'd been out of that for a while. And And as continued, I just feel like, we continue to mature as we age, but my critical thinking continues to turn on. And one of the things that flipped it, believe it or not, was right before the 2020 election. And I would be tuning in to all these prophetic people on YouTube to see what they said about the election, because I still liked them at that point. And everybody was prophesying that Trump was going to win, and he didn't. And then they kept prophesying, well, he's going to get back in office, and then this is going to happen, and this is going to happen. And it just wasn't. And it became so clear to me that, holy smokes, these people are nuts. And they're thinking they're hearing from God, and they're not. It was just a big wake-up call. And I think I'm not the only person. There's plenty of other people in my circles that just went, no. And it also became very clear to me, this whole spiritualizing the political is, we just need to keep them separated, right? Like that's,
yeah.
We got to keep them separated. It's not, Jesus's kingdom is not about politics. And that's the first time that's how they screwed up, is they were expecting Jesus to overthrow Caesar. And he's like, that's not actually what I'm doing, guys. And unfortunately, we're in that same mess again. Anyway, so my critical thinking got turned on more so starting there. And now I'm just looking back as things have continued to happen. I'm looking back and starting to pull things apart. There's one or two elements that I would hear in our movement that gave me pause. One of them was the whole Joel's Army teaching, because it was ripped screaming out of context. I mean, it wasn't what, if you're going to look at that book in historical context and all the things that they're trying to say, they're not saying that we're going to be this big army of young people and believers, spirit-filled, that are going to take over. Like, that's just not, it was about judgment. It wasn't about, yeah. And so I noticed that. My parents noticed that. My parents were part of it. And a little bit of my critical thinking would be activated every time my parents would go, that's actually not biblically accurate at all. And this is a little weird. And then I didn't really want to listen to them, but I couldn't help see it too. So there were little bits. And you just have that mentality of, well, you know what? Take the meat, eat the meat, spit out the bones. It's all right. Like, no one's going to get it 100%. So I just kept trudging on.
Yeah, it's so weird to me to think that this religion and all of its splinter groups and in its history have such strong ties to the politics, because like you just said, the church is no place for this, man. If you want to vote, go talk, go to a public rally for voting. Don't go to church. But we see over and over and over again. In my history, I've been going back, as you probably have seen. I went back to study the Klan history because William Branham was associated with high-ranking officials, not just one, but multiple from the Klan. And they tried the same exact thing in the 1920s. The Klan tried to take over Washington through the state of Indiana, and they actually started putting proxies in place in Indianapolis government, and we're going to put the governor in. And when he didn't make it, then there's this big outcry. The voting system's flawed. There's fake ballots, all of this stuff. And it keeps repeating. You can see in the 60s the same exact thing. Whenever Kennedy was about to be elected, they had this big outcry, and all the Christians banded together who were in part of this movement. And same exact thing. The voting's rigged. Kenny got elected because the voting's rigged. And it just happens over and over and over again. And the Joel's Army, believe it or not, was tied to that racism. It was tied to the Christian identity movement. And I'll never forget the first time I took a step back to just look at manifested sons of God, Joel's Army, what it meant. And I go back and I read Joel 2, and the army that it's referring to was an army of a plague that God had sent because the children of Israel weren't being very good. And so this plague of locusts and caterpillars and everything. And then God said, now you've changed your ways. Now I'm going to take you out of the plague. And
right.
to stop and think that these guys did not even take the time to read and understand what Joel's prophecy meant, it just blows your mind.
It does. It just I keep saying to myself, where were the adults? Why did we turn off our critical thinking skills so often? And I think it's the emotionalism, is that we were always whipping ourselves up to a frenzy because it felt good. It feels good to be overly emotional. And when you're that age, when these younger people, I mean, that's where we're strongest in our emotions, and we can get real passionate, and it's inspiring for the older generation to see the younger people, crying out to God for revival. It's inspiring for them to see us do that. And we enjoyed it. Once you get into that flow and you kind of break past the fear of man, you're afraid, like, what are they going to think about me? What is this person going to think about me? And you're in a group where everyone thinks it's great. It's a little easier to just kind of jump in 100%. I remember watching a young man dancing in the prayer room, and there wasn't a ton of people there. He was the only other young person in the room. And he was just 100% in worshiping Jesus. And it wasn't a girly dance. It was a manly dance, and it looked good on him. And it made me go, you know what? I want that. I think I want to just let go that way and really just be physically worshiping the Lord, not just this quiet in place. And so that a lot of that intense dancing and wildness is really what marked our IHOP experience in Chicago. Not so much in Kansas City. I heard that they kept the dancers in a little box. They didn't like that. They like things more controlled.
So more like go-go dancers.
Not go-go dancers. No. But people with the prophetic flags and the scarves and, special outfits, which have always cracked me up. I'm sorry. I never thought that was cool, but that's okay. Okay, whatever. The control, I think one of the big differences between Kansas City IHOP and our Chicago House of Prayer was initially is that we had a lot more freedom. Mike Bickle was a very type A personality. And if you look at his sermon notes, everything is, part 1, section A, section B. And that his blueprint, his personality was all over that particular house of prayer, with how structured everything is, how people are singing all these passionate, beautiful songs, but if you see the video of the live stream, they're hardly moving. Everyone's got these big headphones on and they're very stiffly, just kind of stuck there. And that was always a little bit strange to me, where we had a lot more freedom, at least in the beginning of our house of prayer. And we had our own Chicago flavor that way. Chicago's famous for their musicians. We had some really good ones. We had some really great musicians, some really amazing, talented singers, and prophetic singers, which another way to put that for those of you that aren't in our stream is they're really good at improv. Okay. So they're just really good. We can just okay, what's the topic? We're going to sing Psalm 23 and go. And then someone's playing chords in the background and it's Lord is my shepherd. And you just start going and just singing it. And it's still really fun for me. I still really enjoy it.
That sounds great.
Fun. It's just great. And it's actually still my favorite way to talk to God is to sit at the piano, open the Bible, and sing God's truth over my own heart. And they would call us singing theologians. He would say, it's here at the House of Prayer, we're going to pray our songs and we're going to sing our prayers. And that focus on connecting to God by singing the word is not, again, that's not a bad thing. And I'm really glad, honestly, this Mike Bickle is a dirtbag revelation came out in pieces. And gradually we're finding out how the depths of his depravity and for how far back came out in pieces, because we just wouldn't have believed it. It was already hard enough to believe that there was a sexual indiscretion. Just that. That was hard to believe. And this is coming on the heels. We're being rocked by the October 7th stuff in Israel and being upset about that. And then a few weeks later, Mike Bickle's stepping down. They're doing some kind of an investigation. I don't know. Half of us are like, I don't know if he did it or not. Let's just see. And, nobody's perfect and we'll just wait to see. But that was unsettling. Then the Jane Doe started coming forward and we're reading the story. Oh my gosh, he was in Paris with her and she woke up in a bed somewhere. What the heck? And we're starting to understand, and he was lying to them and saying, you're going to be in my chariot and we're going to come back with Jesus together in this chariot. And it just became more and more clear how completely bat crap bonkers he is. And all of it is. And I'm like, wow, this is, as an adult, this is hitting even more strange. Then when the emails of Mike Bickle's emails started released, that his communications with Jane Doe's husband, Jack Deere, the level of manipulation, narcissism, grandiose delusions, every spiritual abuse tactic in the book, he was full display showing these in the emails. And reading this as an adult, there's my critical thinking kicking on again. Where were the adults? Who is letting this maniac run things? Where are the checks and balances here? I don't care how gifted and anointed he is. He's trash. He's a trash human. And he was like this. This is what gets me. He was like this from the beginning. He was like this once we found out that it was a 15-year-old babysitter in the 80s. What? I mean, I might have got my facts wrong here or there, but I'm just saying, like, way back there before he started the House of Prayer, it was a teenage girl. That's the final nail in the coffin for me. It's like, no, you've always been horrible. There wasn't just, you had an indiscretion here and there. Just like any of us can stumble in any way, whatever. I'm not going to judge you. No, now I'm judging you, dude. I'm judging you as a wolf in sheep's clothing that we all trusted, and somehow you manipulated all of us. And that's what started this whole process of going back in time, this formational period of my life, and trying to extract whatever was specifically Mike and not the pure word of God, whatever was specifically the culture that he created and not just simple gospel, and trying to separate it out from my personal theology and who I am. Like, for crying out loud, this guy's dreams and visions that he had, it's all part of like the formation of who I have become. It's really disturbing. It's really hard.
It is disturbing. I didn't escape anything similar with regards to the sexual allegations. My grandfather wasn't like that, but the cult structures, it is so similar to watch every single one of them as they progress, because like you describe, going after the children, that's a common theme among every single splinter group that we've examined. You go after the young, because if you can warp their minds when they're young, what happens, it's not just that you hook them, it's that they don't really progress in their critical thinking. And some of them don't progress in just, normal thinkings. People in our support groups, after they have started to deprogram, they've noticed that they act very childish compared to other adults because they've been locked and trapped in this state of child mind, basically. And outside adults who never experienced this, especially the Mike Bickle thing, if a normal human being who's never experienced a cult comes in contact with a person that is saying things like, I'm going to ride the chariot with you back from heaven, they're going to immediately just say, this guy's a fruitcake. But while you're in this, while you're in this state of mind, you can't think as an adult. So the question, where are the adults? The problem is many of the adults have also been suppressed, and they have a childlike mind because their authentic self has been completely isolated, and they've not really developed a sense of security in having a critical thought. Have you ever wondered how the Pentecostal movement started, or how the progression of modern Pentecostalism transitioned through the latter rain, Charismatic, and other fringe movements into the New Apostolic Reformation? You can learn this and more on William Branham Historical Research's website, william-branham.org. On the books page of the website, you can find the compiled research of John Collins, Charles Paisley, Stephen Montgomery, John McKinnon, and others, with links to the paper, audio, and digital versions of each book. You can also find resources and documentation on various people and topics related to those movements. If you want to contribute to the cause, you can support the podcast by clicking the Contribute button at the top. And as always, be sure to like and subscribe to the audio or video version that you're listening to or watching. On behalf of William Branham Historical Research, we want to thank you for your support.
Another aspect of what was wrong with house of prayer culture in the preying on of young people is that they didn't ever encourage us to go to college, get a work history, things that you need to do to become a healthy adult. Anything that wasn't directly house of prayer focused was not outright discouraged, but just never talked about. And it was because it was all about building this man's vision of a house of prayer. And that tells you he wasn't really a good shepherd. Like, he wasn't really a good leader, because it wasn't about his sheep. It wasn't about the people under his spiritual care. It was about the vision. So that's another thing that my parents had noticed, that there was never any encouragement of personal development outside of what would fill the dear leaders' goals and dreams.
Yeah, that's definitely true. I've noticed that whenever I was in it, and I actually had a problem with this. It was one of the few, there were just a handful of things that I had somewhat of a critical thought and an issue with, and that was the fact that your rank and file members, the elders did not want them to become elders. They did not want them to rise in the ranks, because if they can keep them under their control, they're sheeple instead of the eldership and the pyramid structure of a cult. And while I'm reading the Bible, I'm seeing that Jesus creates disciples, and the disciples go create more disciples, and those disciples create more disciples, and it's a way that a religion spreads. And the thought that really struck me was that if this was of the hour message, whatever they call these things in the groups, if this is the thing for the hour, why would you not want it to spread virally and have people become leaders and make leaders create more leaders until this becomes a movement that does usher in the return of Christ, if that was biblical. It is not biblical. Christ comes when he chooses, according to the Bible. But if that were the true intent, if these men truly intended that, they would lead by being leaders. And the critical thought that hit me is that none of these men who are in leadership are true leaders. If you look at the history of just great leaders in the world, they lead by example so that other people become leaders as well. There's not a single person I can think of in the entire movement that is like that.
I'm not 100% there right now, because I feel like I still know some good examples. I still feel like I know some good men that are good leaders within it. But at this point, I wouldn't be surprised if horrible things come out. A funny way to say my new my new strategy for when I can look up to somebody is not till they've been dead for a couple decades. And then I can say, yeah, now I see the fruit of their life. No, it gave it time for any bad stories to come out of the closet of, actually, they were really doing this. Once they've been dead for a while, then you can say, yeah, they were actually a really good leader and a good person. So that's hard.
And that's very common among the people in the support groups. The problem is whenever somebody has betrayed your trust, you have a real problem trusting. And one of the really negative consequences of these types of movements, people who are in a church situation and they realize that the leadership in the church can't be trusted, well, then after they escape, well, what church can you trust the leader? Because I went through this, I thought he was a good leader, and look what happened. And it goes back to the statement that I had on leadership. When leadership is structured such that everyone becomes a leader, you have not just one single person who's the ultimate authority on doctrine and scripture. There's a balance of power. And when you have a cult framework wherein there is a central figure and then there's a hierarchy of leaders under him, they're looking up. They're not looking down to make new leaders in most cases. Now they will, like the carrot on the string example, they will lead you to think that you can become a leader. And that's the thought, as I was processing that, it really hit me that there's just really not a good structure within these cults to create leaders. And so I was in the cult when it hit me, and I'm like, well, what do you do with that? I can't just... My grandfather was the head of our church, and there were numerous sects of, the Branhamism. I can't go to all these people and say, hey, you guys aren't creating leaders. This is like a pyramid, and the guy at the top wins. But I was stuck in that world, right? And I never really... What's odd is I never really thought of it as a cult until after I escaped and started piecing that together. But so what was it like for you after you went through those stages and then suddenly came to terms with the fact that, okay, the leadership here has a serious problem, and now we see all these allegations, and I think you said you may have even been in contact with one of the Jane Does. What was it like in the moments after that, whenever you're coming to terms with the fact that this wasn't a movement that was really of God? What was it?
It just feels very, very confusing to have that foundation that you thought was firm under your feet, just everything being called into question. It's all just disintegrating underneath you. And the bewilderment, the confusion, the lost feeling. Right now, it feels like I'm cleaning out a very chaotic garage, my soul, my belief system. And I'm dragging everything out onto the driveway and examining it and going, where did this come from? Do I really need this? And you're just pitching it all in the dumpster. And right now I got a whole 3 or 4 things in my garage that I'm keeping. And I don't, it can be very, very disorienting. But another element of this, it's not just IHOP. It's also the Charismatic movement. And that was starting to unravel for me with watching all these YouTube prophets be so deeply wrong about Trump. I also started allowing myself to watch some charismatic critical channels. 3 or 4 of those. And the YouTube prophets that I thought were the bee's knees. And it was so scary and hard for me to even just push play on that, because I just viewed them as so negative and grouchy, and sure they are, but there's truth in it. And again, just picking through and being brave enough to okay, just because I'm listening to something spiritual doesn't mean I get to turn my brain off. I got to keep my critical thought on. I can listen to this and see what they have to say. Well, I'm coming to find out that a lot of the people that were huge are engaging in just straight up false prophecy, false personal prophecy, looking people up on Facebook ahead of the conference, looking through the email list of people that had the names and the registration of people that had registered for the conference, and then calling calling out, I see this number, and they call out their address. And you're like, oh man. It was, and everyone's so excited and crying, like, oh, they knew my address. They knew all those things. So it has to be God speaking to me right now in this extreme excitement that God is speaking to you through this man. And a lot of times he just then would just give you a Bible verse. I mean, it wasn't anything super life-changing, usually. It was, yeah, God sees you and he's going to do a new thing. And it was just some amorphous positivity. And they left really excited that they heard from God. And it's just really sad to me. It's really sad that there's so much lying going on, because I do believe that prophetic gifting is something that is available to believers. It's just really often abused by those who are looking for a platform for themselves, because they got to keep that excitement going. So they're like, I'm not hearing anything from God right now, so I'm going to employ this method. And I'm not going to feel bad about it, because, well, I was just giving them a scripture verse and, it's fine. Like, I'm this is me kind of piecing together how they're rationalizing this. And it's everywhere. I don't know that I want to name names, but like it's all these big names that we all thought, we meaning my community, were awesome. And a lot of them are just faking, and really sad and really, really discouraged. I just kind of comfort myself. Like, what do I know is true? What do I know is true that I've experienced, where God has warned me about something and I ended up being right? Now, did I go and tell everybody God's speaking to me and I'm a prophet? No, that's weird. Stop. I could just know, like, hey, like the Bible says, his sheep hear his voice. And it's just some leading and guiding and direction for my life. And it's great. I enjoy that relationship with God myself. But I'm not going to go look for it from some other person, because that's how you get messed up.
And usually the people who are most excited when they call out their address are the same people who are on the mailing lists, because they're subscribed to the mailing list. And you're right, the word of knowledge, or whatever they call this thing that they give the people, they try to set themselves up as a mediator between God and man. And you can go directly to the Bible to get most of these things, these prophetic words that they give you. And sometimes it's a prophetic comfort. Well, you can get the same thing if you just read a few Bible passages, right? Why not go to the author? And they want to set themselves up in that pyramid hierarchy. You have to get to the top, past the cult leader to Jesus, you have to go through the chain. And I really have a problem with men who do this, because they have to know that this is wrong. If they're reading the same Bible I'm reading, they know that this is wrong.
It's the cult of personality is such a big part of why it's wrong. And I noticed that a lot with the leader of our house of prayer, was such a charismatic individual. And I don't mean spiritually, although he was. I mean that charisma. Everybody just loved him. 2 pieces. And I felt super loved by him. He would come up to me and go, Jessica, you're my favorite. And I knew that I wasn't his favorite because he loves everybody. But I felt so loved, and everybody felt so loved by him. And when he would speak and be passionate about these things that he's hearing from the Lord, I mean, you would think that you're feeling this tangible fear of the Lord. Like, oh my gosh, this is terrifying. We need to repent. We need to cry out to the Lord. It was very emotionally intense what they were, or what this main leader was passing down to us. And towards the end of the life of our house of prayer, because it's been closed for a long time now, it really ultimately closed because he left. It just became a lot. He was going through a lot of things personally, and he decided he just needed to take a break. And he moved to Kansas City, believe it or not. And he wanted to be mentored by Mike Bickle. He wanted to be spiritually fathered by him. And shocker, he was too busy. Mike Bickle was too busy for my leader.
Yeah.
You know what? He wasn't a cute girl. So. He wasn't a cute girl. So he had his of like getting fed by these beautiful women, bringing him things to his office and then shutting the door. So, none of us are surprised now that he wasn't going to mentor him. And because everybody was still so like, man, we got to follow. This is our leader. A lot of people moved to Kansas City with him. So our very tight knit, amazing community that we had in Chicago, there's nothing like it in Kansas City. In fact, that's where community goes to die. People don't hang out with each other. They're way too busy building Mike's movement. Community was super hard to find in Kansas City from what I've heard and experienced for a couple months when I was there. But Chicago had this amazing, vibrant community, and we were all hanging out. My girls' apartment was the party palace. All the young people would come to my house. We'd make a bunch of food, do a worship night in my living room. It was wonderful. It was really fun. That all started to change toward the end of our house of prayer because our leader was also very type A. And he felt like things were kind of getting out of control in our prayer room. All the free-spirited people, we weren't really sounding like Kansas City anymore. This thing that Mike Bickle had passed on, we weren't Mike Bickle enough. We weren't doing harp and bowl properly. And now when I say harp and bowl, I mean the model. I mean the way that we did worship. That was so different than any other place. Have you heard of this term before? Have you heard of harp and bowl?
No.
Okay, it's based off of Revelation 5, verse 8, the story about the Lamb taking the scroll, and the elders have a harp, and they have this bowl of incense. And this is a lot of the backstory, or not the backstory, it was a lot of the theology of our prayer room, is that the harp represents the music, and the bowl of incense is the prayer. And this is the marriage of prayer and worship together. We're going to, like I said, sing our prayers, prayer songs, and there's a very specific way we're going to sustain day and night prayer and worship, where we're doing these two things at the same time and leading an entire room into this corporate experience. And so, I mean, there's whole manuals. I printed them out of exactly the order that we do things in. And we started off, getting a gist of it, and then we just kind of flew off and did our own thing. Ultimately. And, even our teams, our whole teams of us would go to different new House of Prayer startups. Like our Chicago team went to Fort Wayne, and we trained them all, their team, how to do harp and bowl perfectly. And, so at the end, our pastor, director person said, we need to tighten up. We need to get better. Picked one very type A personality, young person, to go to Kansas City, get trained, and then come back and retrain all of us to tighten the ship. Okay. And that killed our prayer room. It quenched the spirit. Okay. It killed it because we were trying too hard to be perfect. We were trying too hard to fit into Mike Bickle's box. And, to be successful in whoever's eyes. It's weird.
It's less weird, though, than whenever I thought you were saying harp and bull, like the animal, because if there was a bull in your imagery, I was going to be like, yeah, this sounds like a different religion altogether. So you have come a long way, and you've, your story is, I'm sure your story is going to continue as you continue to deprogram from all of this. What would you say to your former self who was in this years ago, if you could go back and give yourself some advice?
Read the words of Jesus and what he says about prayer, honey. It says, don't keep mumbling on with this vain repetition like the pagans do. Harp and bowl has a lot of repetition. Sing the chorus 6 times, change the chords underneath it, and then sing it 6 more times. I mean, there's very specific things. Prayer is supposed to be a secret thing. Go to your room, shut the door. What your Father sees in secret, He'll reward you openly. So is fasting. We're always on corporate fasts and talking about our fasting. We're always, corporate prayer is okay, right? But, and it's good. It was just a hyper focus. I would go back and tell myself, this isn't really lining up with the big picture of Christianity, of what it is. Are you feeding the poor? Taking care of widows and orphans? Are you concerning yourself with the least of these? Or are you hyper-focused on these really popular, cool people, these big personalities? And the second commandment is just as important as the first, right? And let me fill those blanks in for people here. They taught at the house of prayer that the second commandment flows out of the first. So love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. So they're like, yeah, you'll love people eventually, but you got to get loving God first, right? So the vertical, more important than the horizontal. I would say that there's quite a bit of wisdom found in the Catholic way of doing things is, in order to love God, let's serve the poor. In order to love God, let's do our service and keep the horizontal right. And that choice we're making is a way to love God. I could have used so much more balance there.
Yeah. I remember Alwyn saying that she had the same thought. Why can't we do both? Why do we have to just take the first commandment? I can't remember her exact words, but something about, I want to be a second commandment Christian too at the same time. And
why are we so hyper-focused on this one little thing? And that's how people get off. And that's what I'm seeing big picture, stepping back as an adult. Any group that hyper-focuses on one aspect of Christianity just goes off the deep end and it becomes a cult. And so we want to major on the majors and minor on the minors. What are the major big takeaways? Keep everything in balance. If you're all about prayer, then what the heck else is happening with all the other stuff that God said for us to do? To be good people, to reflect Him.
Yeah, and I go back, when she said it, I was thinking, Jesus said the greatest two commandments is love God and love your neighbor as yourself in the same sentence. So how can you even try to separate those and not be arguing directly with Jesus? And I didn't say that to Alwyn, but I wish I had, so now I'm getting the opportunity to say it with you.
One time that works out,
Exactly. Well, thank you so much for doing this. I'm sure that there's a lot of people that are going to be encouraged by what you had to say today. And thank you for sharing what you have with the others.
No problem. Thank you so much for asking me. That was fun.
Absolutely. Well, if you've enjoyed our show and you want more information, you can check us out on the web. You can find us at william-branham.org. For an overview of the historical research of William Branham and the healing revivals, read Preacher Behind the White Hoods, a critical examination of William Branham and his message, available on Amazon, Kindle, and Audible.